As we continue in this series on the Ten Commandments, I've entitled the series message, Stone Tablets in a Wireless World. And part of the premise behind that particular title series name is that sometimes we have this mentality that the Ten Commandments was for a long ago time, when in fact God fully intended for those Ten Commandments to be as valuable today as what they were when they were given to the children of Israel. So this morning we're going to take a look at the fourth commandment, and we're going to kind of figure out what God wants us to know about that. Let me ask a question as I begin. How would you like to have more hours in your day? This morning in Beta 5, someone boldly spoke out, is that work hours or daytime hours? I said, how many hours would you like to have more in your day? Would you like to have more hours in your week? Or how about more weeks in your year? Sometimes we like to think we'd like more years in our life. If you could have more than 24 hours in a day, how many more hours would you like? Interestingly enough, there was a survey in the United Kingdom of men and women. And men said that they would like to have an extra 6 hours and 36 minutes in their day. Women said they would prefer to have 6 hours and 30 minutes. I'm not sure what the difference in 6 minutes is, but that was the request. In the country of France, women only wanted an extra 3 hours and 36 minutes. Now, I searched through the internet for a similar survey among Americans, but quite frankly, I think we might just be too busy to fill out the form, because I couldn't find anything about that. Some of us probably feel like all we're doing is running around from thing to thing. Have you ever noticed that how many times people answer the question, how are you, with this phrase? I'm busy. Or I'm crazy busy. Or we're going in 100 different directions this summer. It's almost like we need to validate our lives by letting people know how busy we are. When people tell me why they haven't been to church for a while, the number one answer I hear is, we've been pretty busy. We should probably sit forward just a little bit, because the fourth commandment deals with 1/7 of our time, or 14% of our time. Let's say it this way. If you're 14 years old, this command covers 2 years of your life. If you're 21, it applies to 3 years of your life. If you're 42, then 6 years. 63, then you're looking at 9 years of your life. 3 weeks ago, we learned that God doesn't want to be the chief thing. He wants to be everything. 2 weeks ago, we discovered that how we worship God is extremely important. And last week, we looked at the third commandment, and it clouded us when we were challenged to watch our words so that we don't take God's name in vain. I want to review the 10 commandments that we've been learning in consecutive order. We're doing this because many of us don't know the 10 commandments. A recent survey of 1,000 Americans by the Kelton Research has discovered that participants had an easier time remembering the names of the 6 kids of the TV series The Brady Bunch than to name 6 of the 10 commandments. The least remembered children, Bobby and Peter, were listed by 43% of Americans, but the 2 commandments least recalled were to keep the Sabbath holy with 34% and have no other gods besides God at just 29%. Now, I recognize that all of you have not been here every Sunday. We've been doing this series, but I think you'll be able to pick up on them pretty quickly if you participate. Deuteronomy 6, verses 6 and 7 says that these commands are to be inscribed on our hearts so that we can impress them upon our children. Any volunteers who want to come up and help me with the finger exercises for the 10 commandments? Let's see if we can do them. The first commandment, help me with it, please. One finger up and we say, one God, no other gods. The second commandment, we use our other index finger pointed down, no idols. The third commandment, we take the 3 fingers and we put it over our mouth, not take the name of the Lord in vain. Interesting enough, this last Monday I went to the local carryout to get a cup of coffee. And I was giving the young clerk at the desk a little bit of a hassle, I think. And he looks at me and he goes like this. Good job. as if to rest and say Sabbath rest. Okay? I think all of you know the first 4 commandments quite easily. And we're going to review them each time we go through them. It's really kind of an easy thing to understand. Let's give our attention now to that 4th commandment. Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 through 11, we read, "Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your manservant or maidservant, nor your animals, nor the alien within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but he rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy." Now, this 4th command is to keep the Sabbath. And here's more proof that God's ways are not our ways. Of these 10 basic principles for godly character laid out for Israel, God makes one command to rest. Now, Sabbath does not mean Saturday. The word Sabbath translated means rest. And on this list of not murdering or not stealing or not committing adultery is this positive command to rest. Now, if I had been making the list of top 50 or top 100, I might have thrown that in. The top 10, and one of those, rest. Maybe we should rename the 10 Commandments God's Father Knows Best list. You see, it's not what I would have included. Yes, this is the one command that isn't somewhere repeated overtly in the New Testament. Some of you would maybe be too quick to point that out this morning. But why is it that we squirm and we finagle to prove we don't need rest? Sure, the New Covenant gives us the ability to discard the Old Covenant ordinance, but like a baby in bathwater, we've discarded the day and the principle together. And like a toddler at bedtime, we run around because if we sit still, we'll succumb to the obvious need for rest. Kind of like I told my boys as they were growing up, I can hear God saying to us, "This isn't to punish you or to spoil your fun. I give you rest for your sake." In fact, that's how God says it. In Ezekiel 20:12, he says, "I gave them my Sabbath as a sign between us, so they would know that I, the Lord, made them." Jesus said in Mark 2:27, "The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath." You see, the Sabbath was something that God gave to be celebrated and enjoyed. Yet in Jesus' day, that good thing had been taken and made over until it was a burden, not a break. There was this document called the Talmud. It was a book of Jewish traditions which had 24 chapters that listed different ways a person is supposed to keep the Sabbath. Some say that the teachers had taken the 39 letters of this 4th law, multiplied it by 39, and that's how they came up with the 1,521 rules about Sabbath breaking. Take a look at what these rules were. For instance, you could not walk over 3,000 feet from your house. You were not allowed to carry anything that weighed more than a dry fig. You couldn't carry a needle for fear you might sew something. Women were not allowed to look in a mirror. They might pull a gray hair out. You couldn't untie a knot, strike a hammer, weave 2 threads, or even write 2 letters of the alphabet. Since it was illegal to carry a burden, you couldn't even pin a ribbon to your garment. But if that garment had that ribbon sewn onto it, it was part of the garment, which might be a good reason to think it was good they didn't have false feet. Taking a bath was forbidden. Water might splash on the floor and wash it. This is why there were run-ins between Jesus and the Pharisees concerning breaking the Sabbath. Jesus wasn't anti-Sabbath. He just observed it the right way in the right spirit. And we would do well this morning to ask if our times of rest are actually times of rest. Or have we changed our days off and vacations into another reason that we're tired? I can't wait to get back to work so I can get some rest. You ever said that? You see, we need this cycle of rest and work in our lives. It's part of our work life. We need that part. And especially, folks, if you're retired, you just can't say, I've made it to retirement. I worked for 38, 48 years. Now I'm going to rest. You won't be the first, and you won't be the last to die early or dive head first into frustration or depression. In fact, the command says, 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. The New Testament affirms this when Paul says in 2 Thessalonians 3, for even when we were with you, we gave you this rule, if a man will not work, he shall not eat. Work is needed for our lives, but with it, we need the rhythm of labor and rest. Creation itself is full of this cycle. The seasons, the tides, the activity of animals and plants, they all run a cycle of effort and rest, of activity and sleep. This morning I want to kind of preach backwards. I want to start with some application and admit that part of this command is a bit more challenging. After that, with the how in mind, I want us to put it all to the test. I want us to become convinced together that yes, Sabbath really is something that we need to put into practice. So as we consider how to keep the principle of Sabbath, I have to tread lightly, and I recognize that. What I don't need, or what you don't need, is another list of 1,521 commands by Rabbi Tim. It's so hard to approach this with all of our traditional and cultural baggage. Now, some question the obvious up front: what day? The early church set aside a different day for meeting together each week. The Jewish Sabbath began at dusk on Friday evening, and it lasted until the next evening. Sundays became the day of meeting together for early Christians, traditionally, because this was the day that Christ rose from the dead. But somehow, in our culture, Saturday and Sunday were regarded as 2 days that are different. I say were, because now that isn't always the case. And then there are those who work to keep utilities going, or those who work in the medical profession, and other jobs that we've grown to depend on in our society 7 days a week. So if I'm going to keep the principle of the Sabbath, what day is that? But still, I don't think this is most of people's problem. I think the larger problem for most of us is just the struggle of having one. And then there's the question of how, what constitutes rest, how do we define that? Now, you may be a guy that sits behind the desk all week, and you might find going out and cutting a load of wood is somewhat relaxing. Or maybe you're on your feet doing physical work all week, and you might find just sitting and reading restful. No wonder creating 1,521 rules about keeping the Sabbath was a burden. We rest in different ways. And now with a much more complex society, that's especially true. So you know what? I'm not going to sit up here and tell you what your Sabbath needs to be, how long it should be, or what you should be doing or not doing during it. That's going to vary. But I'm going to suggest to you 3 ways to test if you've done it well. Here's a rest test. Ask yourself, after observing this principle, am I refreshed? Number 1. Number 2, did I reflect? And number 3, did I go back to activity refocused? I'll talk more about these later. The main point here is get it done. Figure out how the principle of Sabbath needs to be fit into your life. Be creative. Do what you need to do. Do it. Be deliberate in this. Start figuring out right now, when am I keeping this principle? Or, if you prefer, just say, oh, that's for the Jews, that's for someone else. Ignore the principle. But understand there is a cost involved with that, and you'll pay. The breakdown will come. It could be physical, it could be spiritual, it could be financial, it could be emotional or marital, but it will come. The rest bill will come due. So while you're thinking about whether you're doing this or not, or while you're still having an internal argument that this doesn't apply to you, I'm going to share some observations or some reasons why we need to observe the Sabbath principle. It's not doing nothing. There are several things that we do when we observe Sabbath. For instance, when I observe Sabbath, number 1, I reaffirm that I trust God to provide. I trust God to provide. The principle of Sabbath isn't limited to the Old Testament law. One reason to believe that is because that's where it comes from. It's a precedent of creation and the Exodus of Israel. In Deuteronomy 5:15 we read, remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. Sabbath started when God took a break from working on the seventh day. That's true for everyone. God created the world in 6 days, okay? And then it says that God rested on the seventh day. Why? Was he tired? Well, no. But just like Jesus was baptized for our sakes, God was making a point by resting. Rest is normal. Rest is good. Old Testament law? No. This was 2,000 years before God gave the Ten Commandments. In fact, think about our calendar in itself. Where do we get the idea that a year is 365 days? Well, it's from the sun, the earth, as it rotates around the sun. It takes 365 days. That's where we get our year. What about the idea for 12 months that a month is 28 days or a lunar calendar? Again, space. It's the moon revolving around the earth in 28 days. Where do we get the idea that a week is 7 days long? From the mouth of God himself. In Exodus 16, before the law is given at Sinai, the Sabbath is mentioned again. God's going to provide Israel with bread from heaven. Manna, they'll call it. And every day before the sun goes hot, they're to go out and gather it off the ground. They're to pick up just enough for each person, not hoarding it, and not saving any of it to the next day. And some of them gather too much, try to save something to the next day just in case, and they get a surprise in the morning. Manna and maggots. What a great breakfast of champions. But on Friday morning, everyone was to gather up twice as much as usual, so that on the Sabbath day, they wouldn't have to do the work of gathering. And what happened? It didn't spoil. See, it was a lesson from God. He says, work and take time off like I tell you, and I'll take care of your needs. Do you see that by pushing ourselves past our personal limits, by working without sufficient time off, we're saying that God won't take care of us? Story is told of a guy named Leroy Lawson who remembers as a boy when his family-owned grocery store was facing heavy competition by stores that were open for business on Sunday. Finally, his parents made the decision to do business on Sunday, and he traces the breakup of his home to that decision. Don't tell me that overwork without time off is just a part of the good old-fashioned work ethic. Today, a farmer can produce 100 times more than a farmer 100 years ago. Technology has enabled us to do far more, to produce far more than our grandparents ever dreamed of. And we could have made the choice as a nation to have just as much and work much less. In fact, Juliet Schor in The Overworked American says that if we had cashed it in for time off instead of more money, America would now enjoy a 4-day work week or a 6-month work year with full pay. Well, what have we chosen? To work even more so that we can have even more, only we're too busy to even enjoy what we have. So regardless, for most of us, Sabbath is an exercise of faith, a reaffirmation of everything that doesn't depend on just me after all. So when I observe the Sabbath rest, I reaffirm that I trust God to provide. There's a second reason for observing the Sabbath. I re-acknowledge that God deserves every day. I reaffirm that God deserves every day. You know, we talk about this thing called tithing in the church, giving 10% of our income. It isn't a deal we make with God. You get 1/10, I get the rest. It's a way of saying that all we have belongs to God. Sabbath is the same way. It's not a deal we make with God where we say, God, you get 1 day, I get 6. It's another way of being reminded and testifying that every one of our days belong to God anyway. Stop and ask if this is where you're at. When we fail at this, it usually starts with worry. When we worry, we tend to make money our God. That means we reject God. That means we reject God's rest. That means we suffer a character failure. You see, look at these last 2 reasons for keeping the Sabbath principle. We should point out that Sabbath isn't just about the absence of work. It involves the presence of worship. Leviticus 23 says there are 6 days when you may work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath of rest, a day of sacred assembly. You are not to do any work wherever you live. It is a Sabbath to the Lord. The principle will be kept only when we not only have a regular time off from work, but a regular time of worshiping our God. That's why when I observe Sabbath number 3, or observe Sabbath number 3, I refresh myself. Sabbath is such a basic principle that God even commanded it for the land. In Leviticus it says, the land itself must observe a Sabbath to the Lord. For 6 years sow your fields, and for 6 years prune your vineyards and gather their crops. But in the 7th year the land is to have a Sabbath of rest, a Sabbath to the Lord. Do not sow your fields or prune your vineyards. You see, Israel was to give the land a Sabbath. And farmers learned that land has to have a break to replenish its minerals. Otherwise it becomes depleted. When a field is allowed to lie fallow, it will produce a better crop. And the Jews may not have realized the Sabbath for the land was help the soil not become depleted, but it still taught an important lesson. Even dirt needs rest. And guess what you and I are made of? Dirt. Ron Bell talks about a bowling alley in Beaverton, Oregon, years ago, where he learned something that amazed him. At this alley, every 2 weeks, all the bowling pins were put in storage and another set was taken out of storage. They would rotate these 2 sets every 2 weeks. The reason was to give them a rest. It was discovered that if the wood pins don't get a rest, they lose their vitality. They won't bounce as much or be as alive. But give them some time off and they come back stronger and with more life. Imagine a running back in football who runs ahead of his blockers. At first, he may get extra yards or 2 that way, but by the end of the season, he's useless for being clobbered so many times without blockers, all because he decided to run ahead of the plan. Now, I know it's easy to get heroic and think we're doing more by neglecting rest. I know this because I've been there. Reading on this subject, 2 different authors talked about Psalm 23. Have you ever thought about the words there? He makes me lie down in green pastures. He makes me. One of those authors had a major heart attack, and the other was grounded for a couple of months by mononucleosis. Has God ever made you lie down in green pastures and restore your soul? You see, when I observe Sabbath, I refresh myself. And then number 4, I reassess my relationships and life. There's protection built into Sabbath, not only for myself, but also for those who are around me. Did you ever notice the command is also for others? It goes on, it says, on it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your manservant or maidservant, not your animals, nor the alien living within your gates. Rick actually writes, if we are not home enough to model our values by our presence, our families will learn our priorities by our absence. There was a song years ago sung by Harry Chapin, The Cat's in the Cradle. You probably remember that song. It's about a busy father who's never home as his son is growing up. The boy keeps saying he wants to be just like his dad, and the dad keeps saying that someday he'll be home and they'll have fun together then. And it ends up with the son growing up and the father seeking time with him, and the boy being too busy to visit his dad. The son had become just like him. And the father thought the time demands were temporary, and that opportunities with his loved ones were permanent. But exactly the opposite is true. Have you considered whether you feel the need for time off or not, that your family is pretty sure that you do? What are the odds that work or school or whatever demands that you face are going to suggest to you, hey, you really need to get some time with your spouse, your kids, and just make sure that you're building your home the way you should. The odds are even lower, but these demands are going to suggest you reassess the relationship with God. Psalm 46:10 says, be still and know that I am God. And God repeats that message a lot throughout the Bible. Be still. Actor Michael J. Fox, in an interview with Barbara Walters, was talking about his struggle with Parkinson's disease. One symptom is restlessness. And you could see it in the interview as Michael kept squirming in his chair. And the popular star of movies and TV said, I had to not be able to be still before I could learn to be still. What is it about church camp or retreats or conferences and things like that that makes them so powerful in our lives? I'll tell you what it is. We set aside the business and reassess our relationships and lives, and especially our relationship with God. In the old days, West Virginia coal mining country, there was a group of mules that were used in the mines who were brought out each Saturday where they would spend the day outside. Someone asked why. And the answer? That the mules aren't brought up into the light one day a week, they'll go blind. By keeping the Sabbath holy, we keep ourselves whole. We need the time, not just away from work, but with God, with God's people. There's a test for pilots learning to fly, where they must close their eyes. And the airplane is then turned and its attitude changed until the student can't tell by his senses what way it's heading. Pilot can't tell by looking out the window. Pilot has to learn to look at the instruments and trust them beyond his senses and instinct. We all need to shut out the confusing outside stuff and have quiet, meaningful time with God. Sabbath is a time when we can process a week's propaganda through the filter of God's unchanging principles for living a life of character beyond our senses and instincts. Back in the middle of the Watergate trials, Jed Magruder was asked by a judge how he could enter into something that so clearly seemed wrong. And he said, "Sir, somewhere along the line I lost my moral compass, and with it the ability to navigate my life." And Magruder described to a T what happens to people who don't regularly stop and reassess their lives. They lose their moral compass, and along with it, the ability to navigate their lives. And there's a way to avoid that. So my friends, let me ask you this in closing. Are you tired of giving your life for the run? Yeah, you're tired. You can't seem to think deeply about anything for more than a traffic light uptown. You know that there's a list of things you ought to do, but you have no idea when you're even going to sit down to write the list, and you're tired. Jesus has some words for you. In Matthew 11, he says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart. And you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light." My friends, God's ways are not our ways, but they're always the best way. His way for the harried and the helpless person of our age is rest. Real rest. Why fight that? Why keep putting that off? God's ways prove true. Pray with me, Father. We do confess how we run ragged. And Lord, somehow, some way, we just justify it by life. We break this commandment perhaps more than any other one because we think we're so busy. Father, forgive us for that. Help us to understand that when we rest, our souls are healed. Our persons are healed. Our families can be healed. And Father, what you put in those top 10 commandments are meant for our living and doing. So thank you for your word. Thank you for how you care for us, how you have all this figured out. If only we would just listen. Father, let us say it is well with our soul. In Christ's name I pray.